Okay, so take two here. Hopefully this is reading better. I got a mic out. I have it up on a stand. Well, a Coke bottle. A Coke thing. The first one's audio didn't work, and then the video stopped recording 4 minutes in. So that's unfortunate, but that's okay. I'll just start over. So basically, I'm just going to start on the home page and kind of walk my way through my rhetorical decisions and what led me to make each kind of research decision as well. And hopefully I do it in a way where you can follow along at home. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a good way to capture both myself and the page here. So just starting out on the home page, we have the title, Social Media and User Manipulation, Social Networking Sites and Digital Natives. As you know from my advanced research memo, I was talking a lot about gaming as a form of social media and talking in general about forms of social media that aren't forms of media used in a social context that aren't social media. What I would come to call social networking sites, things like Facebook, Twitter, etc., which I feel are generally problematic just because of how much they monopolize the term social media. It kind of implies that there is a correct way to use media socially and every other way is inferior or just non-valid as a social expression of media. Not that I necessarily think they themselves are perpetuating this, or anyone actively is, but I feel like when you say social media, it has a very specific connotation. When there's so many ways to use media socially, that seems kind of problematic to me. So essentially, that's where I went. I was originally going to compare social media through Facebook and similar SNS sites, SNSs, I guess, SN sites, social networking sites. I was going to compare those with things like video gaming, other online communities, other digital groups, and compare kind of their rhetorical practices and compare how they address their audience, compare how all these things work together. But I eventually decided that the best way to do it would just be to analyze how Facebook addresses users on both a social level, and I dropped my microphone, sorry about that, that's probably not going to register well. How it addresses users on a social level and on a media level. I was essentially breaking down the term social media into social and media to see how these SN companies, SN sites use social practices and media practices in their works. So my research question to kind of keep this on track was, how has the developing relationship between technology and media as a social outlet limited both how technology is expressed as an extension of our social behavior and how we interact with and understand technology as digital natives? And that can be found on my homepage, right under the introduction. Basically, it's like I said, so that it keeps me focused and I think gives me a good avenue to explore everything I want to. So here I'm going to click on the Explore, the first one here, over what is a social networking site. This will just give us basic definitions. There isn't really much here that I feel we need to go over. Most of this is so that, because I think it is important that the website stands on its own. And I feel like this is a good way to do that, is to have this definition, but most of it should already be known to anyone in the class or to anyone with a familiarity with what we're talking about. The biggest takeaway here is social networking sites, SNSs, I am differentiating from social media as a whole, even though I'll probably use the terms interchangeably. Basically, the biggest difference is social networking sites are specifically used as a social structure with people who are joined by a common interest. Often this is something like Twitter, Facebook, even Instagram, Snapchat. They'll give users ways to express their interest in this interest with a select set of tools. Like Snapchat's the best example. You can edit or send, manipulate pictures, that kind of stuff. And then finally, we're going to be talking a lot about Facebook because Facebook is the most popular social networking site. We talk about how it has more users than any country has people. So if it were a country, it would be the biggest country. So I feel like it's apt to use. So going up to the menu up here, I'm clicking that and scrolling over home and then going down to social in quotes, and that's where we'll go next. So here we're going to look at the social ramifications of social media. Essentially, this is the part where we look at the research on social media and how it affects us socially and mentally and the side effects of that. And essentially, this is a part where I'm a little bit worried that I came across as someone who didn't like social media and was attacking it, when really that isn't my goal. My goal was never to say social media is bad or people should get off social media. My goal was rather to look at the ways in which social media is designed to play into these negative habits of ours. Because as I explained in my paper, anyone can use a tool in a negative way. What's important is how the tool was crafted. And I think there's enough, well, actually, I think there's a amount of evidence suggesting that Facebook was crafted with these things in mind, not as a negative, but rather the features also have a negative side effect. So real quick, we'll just go over, we have some studies that show how Facebook is addictive, how it, a lot of Facebook use is linked with lower self-reported happiness. Comparing our lives to those of our friends is mentally harmful. More social media friends typically means that you have, or beyond a certain point, means you have a lower social health off of Facebook and just in general. And there was a study that showed that quitting Facebook increases your well-being. But like I said earlier, I don't mean to imply that social networks are all bad or even that Facebook, people should quit it. And I'm not trying to just say that it's all negative either. A lot of these studies, if they don't have positive side effects, are at the very least cautionary to say this is all Facebook's fault. A lot of it is users and how it's used. What's important to me is this video clip, which shows Mark Zuckerberg talking about how Facebook is going to advance. And this was in 2004, right when Facebook was just starting. I think it's important to see his practices, because he says things like he wants to keep people coming back and have people check each other out, which are innocent terms on their own, but ultimately lead to a lot of this addicting behavior. We have people constantly on their Facebook pages because it's designed to keep you there, constantly updating, constantly, throwing new stuff in your faces. And I think that is harmful to us as people. And I think it is designed that way. It's not designed to be harmful, to be clear, because people do like checking these things out. It just plays into our negative habits. It's sort of like how, let's say candy is bad for you, but I don't think people who make candy are bad people. I think they're doing something they enjoy, and candy in moderation is fine, but it does play with your brain in a specific way, and if you're a certain kind of person, you're exposed to it in a certain kind of way, then you might be more susceptible to becoming addicted to it. And I think it's similar with Facebook. And the takeaway here isn't Facebook can be addictive. The takeaway here, in my opinion, is there are practices in Facebook's marketing that make it potentially addictive, intentionally. Not necessarily that it is intentionally addictive, but that it intentionally has these practices and that the practices are addictive, if that makes sense. I don't want to imply Facebook is trying to get its users addicted, because I don't think that matters. What matters is these practices were intentionally chosen, and these practices are addictive, and both of those are things that we know. So moving on here, I'm going to go to Menu, Home, Media, in quotes. And this is the part of the research memo I think is the most interesting, or the research project rather, that I think is the most interesting, because it kind of combines a lot of what we talked about in the book. It's similar to how I looked at how Facebook manipulates the social aspect of the users. I wanted to look at how digital natives interacted with technology and how Facebook took advantage of that and how it interacted with that. So essentially, I used a quote from the Born Digital book, the Palfrey book, on page 239 of the digital one, which is the first edition, so it's probably different in the physical copy, so I apologize if the page numbers aren't the same. The quote is, "Digital natives gather information through a multi-step process that involves grazing, a deep dive, and a feedback loop." And this is the crux of my argument on the media side here, because I think this is a good interpretation of how people interpret information online. And this is more for learners, more for how we learn online, but I think it's equally true in social outlets. And I think in a way we are learning in social outlets. We're learning both facts and just generally about each other. So the grazing process, we're exposed to a lot of headlines. Essentially, we're really good, digital natives are really good at, exploring headlines, picking out facts really quickly, and just absorbing a lot of rapid fire information and sorting it into, this is interesting, this is something I disagree with, this is something I agree with, that kind of stuff. The deep dive is a thorough exploration of a topic of interest. For instance, reading a whole news article instead of just a headline. That's probably the most simple one. And then the feedback loop is how we interact with this information. It could be through a Facebook post or sharing something on Facebook or Twitter or a blog post, responding to a blog, making a video about it, responding to a video about it, all kinds of stuff. The feedback loop is definitely the most interesting part of this process because it, to me anyway, because it is how we as digital natives interact with it. And I have on this page, this media page, this nice, very simple little flowchart showing grazing to the deep dive to the feedback loop. And I think that's how, generally speaking, just a very, very simple visualization of how Palfrey's process works here. But then going into how Facebook deals with it, we have this much more muddled infographic, or picto, what did I call it earlier? Flowchart, showing how Facebook can kind of mess with this very simple process. So for instance, for the grazing, we have, instead of just going straight from grazing to the deep dive, we have constant updates because, like I said earlier, Facebook is designed to constantly be telling us, hey, this person posted, this person responded to something you posted, this person liked something you posted, and that leads to constant refreshing. And that essentially drags out the grazing process because it makes it so people will be much more likely to to spend more time grazing and less time deep diving, and I think that inherently harms the overall process because we're getting much less concrete information and much more surface level information, and that makes us less, that just messes with generally how this process has been developing. The deep dive section is the one that I think has probably been impacted the most for two main reasons. The first is websites like Facebook and Twitter have a lot of paid content that will be pushed onto users much more thoroughly than the user-created content. And that's a problem because it creates an artificial level of interaction. If so few people are already deep diving and then a certain percentage of what they deep dive is stuff that's been paid for, it kind of muddles with the integrity of whatever you're reading because you have to think, well, is this real or is this something that Facebook is telling me to read because someone paid for it? More importantly, though, I think the echo chamber plays into both the deep dive and the feedback loop because with the echo chamber, essentially, this is a concept that I read about from someone named Hossingar. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it essentially is what it sounds like. You unfollow people who disagree with you, you mute them, you generally just get their voices out of your feed because there is a lot of negativity in reading a bunch of things you disagree with a lot. So that inevitably leads to most people on Facebook having only people they agree with in their circle. So everyone's just echoing each other and parroting these same comments, and that affects the deep dive and the feedback loop. The deep dive because when you are interested in a topic and you go deeper into it, you're more likely to be getting a biased source or a source that isn't giving both sides of the argument or is only giving your side of the argument. And with the feedback loop, it's the exact same. You're getting the exact same feedback from everyone. They're very similar. The amount of discourse in the comments is definitely going to go down because of this feedback or because of this echo chamber. And that's kind of what I wanted to say about the media side because I feel like as digital natives, the way we interact with media in general, while it is shaped a lot by things like Facebook, it is also harmed by it because all of these issues kind of muddle how we interpret information. We've developed this new way of interpreting information in a digital age, and I feel like Facebook is kind of trying to stay one step ahead of us by not nefariously, just making us look at these things like the updates. I don't think it's intentionally saying, oh, we'll do this and then we'll affect the deep dive process, right? I think they're just saying, oh, people like updates, so we'll give them more updates. And similarly, people don't like hearing opinions they don't like, so we'll give an option to mute your friends. And And I don't want to imply any of this is bad or I disagree with Facebook practices. I just think it does have adverse effects on how we interact with media as digital natives. And overall, that's basically my project. I wrote more about it in the paper, but mostly that's what I wanted to say. I think the biggest takeaway for me was I would like to go more in depth with a couple parts of it, specifically the sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Specifically the part about how Facebook is designed to affect the users socially. I couldn't find a ton about it firsthand, a ton about how Facebook itself is actually creating these things. I found mostly here's what Facebook does to us without knowing their intent. And I would like to know more about that. I would like to know more about how it is designed for digital natives and non-digital natives. But right now, that's about as far as I can go. And yeah, that's basically my project.